black elderly woman intimidated by police in market, but the reversal that happened next was so impactful, it became national news and shocked the country. Donna Isabel walked slowly through the market, her gait marked by the weight of years and the experiences she had lived. At 75 years old, she carried with her the story of a life filled with struggles and achievements, but also of pain and discrimination. The smell of fresh fruits and the sound of lively conversations around her couldn't ease the anxiety that accompanied her as she carefully selected ingredients for dinner. It was a simple routine, but it made her feel alive, connected to the community that had always supported her. However, that day, this tranquility would be abruptly interrupted. As Isabel bent down to grab a ripe avocado, two police officers approached her. The first, a robust man with a serious face and crisp uniform, interrupted her moment with an authoritative voice. "Hey ma'am, what are you doing here? We need to talk." Confused, Donna Isabel straightened up, the avocado nearly slipping from her hands. "Excuse me, sir, but I'm just buying a few things for dinner," she replied, her voice trembling yet firm. The gazes of other customers made her uncomfortable, and she felt a wave of heat rise to her face. "We're not talking to you, you thief," shouted the second officer, a younger man with a look of disdain. "We received a report of theft. You stay right there." Isabel felt her heart race. "But I haven't done anything. I'm here like anyone else." Her voice rose, but the indignation was quickly drowned out by fear. The disapproving looks from the other customers made her feel even more vulnerable. "Enough of the theatrics. We're taking you to the station to sort this out," the older officer said, advancing towards her. Isabel couldn't believe what was happening. Around her, people began to murmur, some with expressions of compassion, and others with morbid curiosity. The clamor of injustice was about to be filmed and shared. Amid the chaos, a bystander, a young man with a cell phone in hand, started recording. The video captured every expression of pain and despair on Donna Isabel's face, the humiliation of being treated like a criminal in front of everyone. "This isn't right," he shouted, but his voice was lost in the tumult. "You can't do this to her." As the officers pushed her, Isabel felt her legs weaken. "Please leave me alone, I just want to go home." Her plea echoed but went ignored. The weight of racism and oppression crushed her, and she found herself being dragged, exposed to everyone's gaze, like an example of what not to do. The video quickly spread across social media. Indignation took over the comments, with people of all ages expressing their horror at what they had just witnessed. Meanwhile, Miguel, a local journalist, was at home watching it all unfold on his computer screen. Seeing Donna Isabel being verbally assaulted broke something inside him. He knew he had to act. "How can this still happen?" Miguel murmured, feeling a knot in his throat. He remembered his own experiences and the stories he had heard from his grandmother about the fight against discrimination. This brutal act was not just an injustice against an elderly woman, but a continuation of a battle that had lasted generations. Determined to investigate the case, Miguel grabbed his notebook and began jotting down questions. Who are these officers? What led to this situation? He thought, his heart pounding with a burning desire for justice. This can't go on like this. The day when Donna Isabel transitioned from a simple market shopper to a symbol of resistance was just beginning. The fight for justice would not be hers alone. It would become a collective cry, a call for all those who had ever felt powerless and wronged. As Donna Isabel attempted to return to her routine after the incident in the market, memories from the past began to resurface, like shadows dancing in her mind. For a moment, she found herself transported back to her youth, when the fight for equality pulsed in the veins of an entire generation. The image of her, young and full of hope, marching alongside other activists against racial discrimination, was vivid. The shouts for justice and freedom echoed in her memory, just as the songs that filled those times did. It was a time of bravery, but also of deep pain and sacrifice. Listening to the radio play an old song, Isabel closed her eyes and let the memories flow. "Gone are the days when we were just young dreamers," she murmured to herself, as a tear rolled down her wrinkled cheek. The music took her back to those marches, where the unity of the community was palpable. She remembered when, at the height of the struggle, they came together to demand their rights, facing repression with courage and dignity. Miguel, the journalist who had become interested in Donna Isabel's story, decided to visit her again. He felt there was something deeper in her struggle, something that needed to be revealed. When he arrived at her home, he found Isabel sitting on the porch, gazing at the horizon as if revisiting the past. Dona Isabel, Miguel began softly. May I sit down? Of course, my child. This house is yours, she replied with a shy smile, though her eyes still reflected the pain of the recent incident. Before continuing this emotional story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any stories. And let us know in the comments which city you're watching this video from. Miguel sat beside her, taking a deep breath before asking, Do you remember how it all began? The struggle you and your friends fought? Isabel looked at him, confusion mingling with nostalgia. I remember everything, Miguel. It feels like it was just yesterday. We dreamed of a better world, where the color of one's skin wouldn't be a burden. But reality? Oh, reality is so cruel, she said, her voice heavy with emotion. I'd like to understand your story better, Miguel continued. This could help show the world that this fight isn't just yours. It's all of ours. She hesitated, looking at her wrinkled hands as if seeking the strength she once had. I don't know if I can talk about it. They are painful memories, and I don't want to relive that suffering. Miguel watched her with empathy. But your story is important, Dona Isabel. It can inspire others to rise up and fight. What happened to you in the market isn't an isolated case. It's part of a cycle of injustice we need to break. Isabel took a deep breath, recalling the voices of her fellow fighters. Maybe you're right. If my story can help someone, maybe it's worth sharing. She looked up at the sky, as if seeking courage among the clouds. I remember a day when we marched in front of the palace. The atmosphere was tense, but our hearts were full of hope. Tell me about it, Miguel encouraged, his eyes shining with expectation. It was a hot summer day. There were so many of us, holding signs and singing. Freedom, equality. We felt like we were making history, but there was also the repression. I remember the fear that accompanied us, yet the strength of the community pushed us forward. We were family, fighting for a better future. Isabel's voice trembled, but her determination began to emerge. And what would you like to tell the new generations? Miguel asked, curious. Isabel looked at him, her eyes sparkling with the passion of a vibrant past. That the struggle must never cease. That we must raise our voices against injustice, no matter how many times they try to silence us. And that unity is our greatest strength. As the conversation flowed, Julia, Isabel's daughter, entered the house. Miguel's gaze met hers, and he realized that the flame of resistance was igniting in every member of the family. She had seen the viral video and was feeling the pressure of what was to come. Mom, are you okay? Julia asked, concerned. I'm fine, sweetheart. Just reminiscing about some stories with Miguel, Isabel replied, smiling in an attempt to ease the tension. We need to do something about this, Julia exclaimed. Dee, what happened to you cannot go unpunished. I want to organize a protest. The community needs to unite. Isabel, looking at her daughter, felt a wave of pride and fear at the same time. Julia, it's dangerous. I know, but we can't stay silent. It's time to fight, Mom, and I want you to be with me. Miguel, observing the dynamic between mother and daughter, sensed that Isabel's story was just beginning to be told. The voices of resistance were coming together, ready to echo through the streets, and the flame of indignation was beginning to burn brightly as the community prepared to rise up in search of justice. Pedro arrived home, the weight of the day still hanging over his shoulders. The image of Isabel haunted him, a painful echo in the back of his mind. When he opened the door, he was greeted by his wife, Clara, who immediately noticed the tense expression on his face. What happened, Pedro? She asked, her voice soft yet filled with concern. He took a deep breath, trying to find the right words. It wasn't easy to talk about what he had done, and guilt was consuming him slowly. I had a tough day at work. An incident with an elderly woman. He hesitated, the memory of the theft accusation still fresh in his mind. The police, we treated her brutally. Clara frowned, her gaze deepening with worry. Are you talking about Dona Isabel? That video that's going around? I saw it, Pedro. What you all did was horrible. How could you allow that to happen? Her frustration was palpable, and Pedro felt small under the avalanche of her emotions. He knew he couldn't justify his actions, but he felt trapped in a system that often forced him to act against his own principles. I didn't want that to happen, Clara. He looked at the floor, avoiding her gaze. But in that moment, I let the pressure get to me. Everyone was shouting, and I just did what I thought I should do. Clara crossed her arms, disapproval evident in every line of her face. That's not an excuse, Pedro. The woman did nothing. You know that. And now, with everything happening, you can't stay silent. You need to speak out about this. He looked at her, confused. And how can I do that? If I speak out, I'm putting my career at risk. What if the department finds out? What if they fire me? And what if you don't speak out? Clara shot back, the intensity of her words making Pedro shiver. Are you going to let this injustice continue? You're part of the problem, and you know it. Pedro stepped away, walking to the window. He watched the street, where the shadows of the night began to lengthen. He remembered his childhood, when his father told him stories about racism and discrimination. Back then, he was just a child, not fully understanding the implications of what he heard. But now, the reality was different, and he was at the center of it, wearing a uniform that was supposed to protect citizens but instead perpetuated fear and oppression. I'm not a racist, Clara. I don't believe in that. He spoke, his voice low and trembling. But what I saw today made me question everything I know. Then you need to do something, Clara insisted, her voice now filled with determination. Talk to someone. Seek help. Don't let this weight consume you. Don't let it define who you are. He turned to face her, finding her firm gaze, and felt a wave of emotions. It was true. He couldn't continue like this. With a deep sigh, he decided he needed to confront his fears and take a stand. In a haunting flashback, Pedro remembered sitting at the kitchen table as a child, listening to his father say that the world was a cruel place, that people were treated according to the color of their skin. At that moment, he had no idea how those words would shape his future. Now his father's lessons echoed in his mind, and he realized he had the responsibility to break that cycle. That night, a decision blossomed within him like a flame, illuminating a path he hadn't known he could walk. He needed to find the courage to confront not only his colleagues but also himself. The fight for justice and equality demanded action, and Pedro was ready to take the first step. You're right, Clara, I'm going to speak out. I'll find a way to do it, he said, his voice now firm. Clara smiled, a glimmer of hope in her eyes. That's all I wanted to hear, Pedro. You can make a difference. And so, as the night deepened, Pedro began to plan his next steps, aware that the road ahead would be difficult, but necessary for the redemption he so desperately sought. Julia looked out of her window, observing the street that had always felt so familiar but now seemed different. Indignation surged in her chest, and the image of her mother, Donna Isabel, being humiliated in front of strangers, wouldn't leave her mind. She knew she couldn't stay still. With a deep sigh, she grabbed her phone and began messaging friends and acquaintances, calling for a community meeting. It was time to act. That night, the community room was packed. The atmosphere was charged with expectation and urgency. The voices intertwined, some louder, others hesitant, but all sharing the same feeling of revolt. Julia stepped up to the makeshift stage, her heart racing. She looked out at the crowd and saw familiar faces, many of whom had also been affected by racism and injustice. Thank you all for coming, she began, her voice steady yet laden with emotion. We are here because something terrible happened to my mother, Mrs. Isabel, and this cannot go unpunished. A murmur of support spread through the room. Julia continued, she is not just a victim. She is a mother, a grandmother, a woman who has fought for rights and dignity her entire life. We need to show that we will not accept this brutality. We must be her voice and the voice of everyone who has suffered unjustly. From the back of the room, a middle-aged man raised his hand. Julia, what are you thinking of doing? How can we help? We need to organize a protest, Julia replied, filled with determination. A peaceful protest where we can come together and demand justice. No one can ignore our pain if we stand united. The discussions intensified, ideas flowing, but concerns also surfaced. An older woman with weary eyes looked visibly anxious. What if the police try to repress us? We don't want more violence. We need to be careful, but we cannot let fear stop us, Julia responded, trying to reassure her. We'll plan everything safely. We can create posters, gather support, and make our voices heard. If we join forces, we will be stronger than anyone who tries to silence us. Miguel, who was present at the meeting, listened attentively. He knew that an article alone would not be enough to bring about the change everyone longed for. He approached Julia, and with an encouraging smile said, You're doing an amazing job, Julia. I can help spread the word about the protest, and write about the importance of the fight for your mother and for all of us. Thank you, Miguel. Your help will be crucial, Julia replied, feeling renewed with the journalist's support. We need the media to help amplify our message. This isn't just about my mother, it's about everyone facing this type of injustice. More voices rose, with people offering help, ideas, and resources. A young man volunteered to create a banner with the phrase, "Justice for Mrs. Isabel." The energy in the room was contagious and determination grew with each passing moment. The meeting stretched late into the night, with plans being laid out and goals established. When they finally dispersed, Julia felt a wave of hope. She knew the fight wouldn't be easy, but the community was coming together and that was a powerful sign. With a smile on her lips, she looked at Miguel. "Now it's time to act. Let's make this happen." Miguel nodded, sharing the same sense of urgency. "Let's take this story to the world. We won't rest until justice is served." As they left the room, the night was cold, but the hearts of Julia and everyone who had been there were warmed by the flame of resistance. The struggle was just beginning, and the community was ready to rise and make their voices heard. Miguel felt anxious as he headed to Mrs. Isabel's house that afternoon. He felt a weight in his chest, a mix of empathy and determination. Ever since he had watched the viral video, his life had changed. The pain of an elderly woman unjustly assaulted echoed in his heart like a call to action. He needed to understand Mrs. Isabel's story, not just as a journalist, but as a human being. Upon arriving, he found the door ajar and felt a chill in his stomach. The smell of freshly brewed coffee filled the air, but the atmosphere was tense. Mrs. Isabel was sitting at the table, her trembling hands wrapped around a cup. She looked at Miguel, her eyes reflecting the pain and exhaustion of a lifetime of struggles. Miguel pulled out a chair, and with a gentle smile said, "Hello, Mrs. Isabel. I'm Miguel. I came to talk a little, if you're willing." She hesitated, looking at her cup as if seeking answers in the coffee foam. "I don't know, young man. What's there to tell? What happened is no news to anyone. I understand that you're tired, but your story is important. What happened cannot be forgotten, and I want to hear your voice. It's not just about what happened, but about who you are," Miguel replied, trying to calm her. Mrs. Isabel took a deep breath, and Miguel sensed that this was a delicate moment. "I fought a lot, Miguel. I fought in my youth, on the streets for the rights of my people, but now it feels like it was all in vain," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "It wasn't in vain. The fight continues, and your voice can inspire others to fight too. What would you like people to know about you? About what happened that day?" Miguel insisted, looking at her earnestly. Mrs. Isabel gazed out the window, as if searching for memories hidden behind the glass. "I was so young, full of dreams. I remember marching, shouting for equality, seeing my friends being taken by the police just for existing. Today I see the same thing happening again, and the pain is the same," she said, tears streaming down her face. Miguel, deeply moved, decided to share a bit of his own story. "I've also faced tough situations. My father was discriminated against because of his skin color, and I grew up hearing the stories of injustice he faced. Sometimes I feel like I'm fighting for him too." Mrs. Isabel looked at him, now with a faint smile. "You're brave, Miguel. Sometimes the only way we confront fear is by sharing our stories. It unites us." The next day, Julia, Miguel's daughter, was at home, surrounded by papers and posters. The video of her grandmother was still trending on social media, and the community's outrage was beginning to spread. She felt a mix of anger and hope as she planned a protest. "We need to do something, and fast. We can't let this be forgotten," she said, scribbling ideas in a notebook. "You're right, Julia, but we need a plan. What do you think we should do first?" asked a friend beside her, observing the energy radiating from Julia. "Let's organize a community meeting. We need people to come together and feel supported. Together we are stronger," Julia replied, her eyes shining with determination. That same afternoon, Miguel and Julia met at a cafe to discuss the next steps. "I talked to your grandmother yesterday. She's willing to share her story, but she needs support," Miguel said, watching Julia's reaction. "That's great. If she speaks out, we can attract more attention to what happened. People need to see her as a person, not just as a victim. I want her story to go far," Julia replied passionately. "Exactly. And I'm going to write about it. We need the media on our side. Her voice needs to be heard," Miguel declared, excited by the idea. Julia smiled, feeling that they were starting to forge a powerful connection across generations. "Let's do this, Miguel. Let's make sure my grandmother's voice, and ours, are heard." With a renewed purpose, they both stood up, ready to face the struggle that lay ahead, firm in the belief that resistance and solidarity could change the course of that story. Pedro couldn't find peace. The nights had become a battlefield, where every shadow cast on the wall of his bedroom seemed to whisper the guilt he tried to ignore during the day. He tossed and turned in bed, his eyes fixed on the ceiling, as images of the incident with Dona Isabel replayed in his mind like an endless movie. "What did I do?" he murmured to himself, his voice choked with remorse. He recalled the looks of disdain from passers-by, the shouting, the pain in her eyes. He turned to the side, trying to push the thoughts away, but it was futile. That morning, his wife, Anna, entered the room with a cup of coffee. She watched him with concern before sitting on the edge of the bed. "Pedro, you need to talk about this," she said, her voice soft yet firm. "I'm worried about you," he sighed, looking at the coffee cup she had placed beside him. "What could I possibly say, Anna? I don't know what happened. I just followed orders." "Following orders doesn't justify what happened," Anna replied, her expression serious. "You saw the people's reactions, the pain of that woman. How can you just ignore that?" Pedro got up from the bed and began to pace, his hands shoved in his pants pockets. "I'm not ignoring it. I just don't know what to do. If I speak up, I could lose my job. And if I stay silent, I'm also guilty." Anna stood up and walked over to him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You need to decide, Pedro. What's more important, your career or doing the right thing? That woman is a mother, a grandmother. She deserves justice." Her words echoed in his mind. He knew Anna was right, but the pressure from his superiors and the culture within the police force kept him trapped in a moral dilemma. As he lost himself in thought, the phone rang. It was his superior. "Pedro, we need to talk about the incident. I want you to keep your mouth shut about it, understood?" The tone was authoritative and threatening, reinforcing the pressure he was already feeling. Any slip-up, and you might regret it. After the call, his heart raced. He sat at the kitchen table, the coffee cup now cold in his hands. Anna spoke again, but he was lost in his own thoughts. "You need to be honest, not just with others, but with yourself," she said, watching him with concern. That afternoon, the community was preparing for a peaceful protest in support of Dona Isabel. Julia, Dona Isabel's daughter, had mobilized people on social media, and the energy was building. Pedro was aware of what was about to happen, and the thought of being on the wrong side of the situation tormented him. At the protest, demonstrators gathered in front of the central square, holding signs and chanting slogans. "Justice for Dona Isabel," echoed through the air. Pedro, in his uniform, stood among the officers assigned to manage the situation. The contrast between the protesters and his colleagues was palpable. He felt like an intruder. As the hours passed, tension mounted. He saw Julia, her eyes shining with determination, leading the group, and he couldn't help but admire her courage. "They won't silence us," she shouted, raising her fist, and the crowd responded in unison. Pedro approached a colleague, trying to muster courage. "Don't you feel bad about this? Looking at those faces and knowing we're on the opposite side?" "You're being weak, Pedro," his colleague replied dismissively. "We're just doing our job. They don't understand." His words hit Pedro like a punch to the stomach. This was what police culture had taught him, what had made him accept brutality. Confusion and anguish consumed him when, suddenly, the situation escalated. The police began to encircle the protesters and the atmosphere shifted rapidly. Julia was at the center of the crowd, her voice ringing out. "We have the right to protest. We won't be silenced." She was so close to Pedro that he could hear every word. In that moment, he realized he could no longer remain silent. The truth needed to come to light. "Don't do this," an officer shouted, but Pedro felt as though he were in a trance, compelled to act. He took a deep breath, his heart racing, and prepared to cross the line he had drawn in his mind. The fight for justice was not just for Dona Isabel, but for all who had suffered in silence. He knew that, regardless of the consequences, he needed to do the right thing. Miguel was determined to uncover the truth behind the incident that had shocked the community. The image of Dona Isabel being humiliated by the police haunted him, and the idea that the story might have hidden nuances motivated him to dig deeper. In his relentless pursuit of justice, he decided he needed to speak with the witnesses who were present in the market on the day of the assault. He began his journey by going to the local market, a vibrant place full of life and stories. Upon entering, the smell of fresh fruits and spices filled his nose, but the atmosphere felt different. Miguel noticed that many patrons looked at him with a mix of curiosity and distrust. He approached a stall where an elderly woman, Mrs. Maria, sold vegetables. "Hi, Mrs. Maria. Do you remember what happened to Dona Isabel a few weeks ago?" Miguel asked, trying to strike up a conversation. The woman lowered her head, as if the weight of the memory oppressed her. Yes, I saw everything. It was horrible, my son. She was just buying some things for dinner. She wasn't doing anything wrong. Could you tell me more about it? What exactly did you see? Miguel insisted, pulling out his notepad and pen. Mrs. Maria took a deep breath, recalling the fateful day. The police came shouting. I thought it was a misunderstanding. Donna Isabel didn't seem threatening. They surrounded her and began accusing her. I tried to intervene, but they told me to shut up. Miguel noted everything, realizing that the officer's aggressive behavior had been disproportionate. Do you remember if anyone recorded what happened? Yes, a guy was filming. He was as shocked as we were, the woman replied, her eyes widening as she recalled the moment. With this information, Miguel thanked her and decided to look for the young man who had recorded the scene. He walked through the streets toward the place where the video had gone viral, asking a few people if they knew the guy. After some frustrating attempts, he finally found a group of teenagers who recognized the name Lucas. He's over there near the square, one of the girls pointed out. Miguel approached and soon saw Lucas, a young man with messy hair and an attentive gaze. He was chatting animatedly with friends, but as he noticed Miguel approaching, his expression shifted to one of caution. Hey Lucas, can I talk to you for a minute? Miguel asked, trying to sound friendly. Sure, but what do you want? Lucas replied hesitantly. I'm a journalist investigating the case of Donna Isabel. You filmed what happened, didn't you? I need to know what you saw, Miguel said, trying to establish a dialogue. The young man looked around as if fearing someone might be listening. I did film it, but I'm not sure if it's a good idea to talk. The police are all over this, he said. I understand, but the truth needs to come out. Donna Isabel needs help. What you saw could make a difference, Miguel insisted, his tone encouraging. Lucas hesitated, but the determination on Miguel's face made him reconsider. Okay, I'll tell you. I saw the cops acting aggressively. Donna Isabel was calm, but they were shouting and pushing her around. I yelled for them to stop, but they just got more irritated. Do you remember anything specific that could help? Miguel asked, eager for details. Yes. One of the officers was wearing a different badge. He seemed to be the chief. I heard him say that there was no room for another case of racism, as if he was worried about the backlash, Lucas revealed, his eyes filled with concern. Miguel quickly jotted down everything, feeling that each word was a step closer to the truth. Can you send me the video? We need to show that the official version might be wrong. Sure, I can, but only if you promise to take care of it, Lucas said, restless. I promise. The truth must be revealed, Miguel replied, determined. With the recording in hand and new evidence, he felt revitalized in his mission. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to fit together, and Donna Isabel's fight for justice was gaining momentum. He knew the truth was about to come to light, and he was willing to do whatever it took to ensure that the voice of resistance was not silenced. The sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, as the square in front of the police station filled with demonstrators. The atmosphere was electric, charged with hope and tension. Julia, holding a sign that read "Justice for Donna Isabel," stood at the center of the group. Around her, determined faces reflected the collective passion for justice. With each shout of support, the crowd seemed to unite stronger, as if Donna Isabel's pain was a shared wound. Those images, the way she was treated, I don't know how I could be a part of that. You need to stay calm. They're here to protest, but you know how this can end, she said, glancing at the agitated crowd, like a sea of voices demanding change. On the other side, Julia picked up a megaphone and, with a firm voice, began to speak. We are here today because we can no longer accept that people like my mother are treated with disrespect and violence. The police should protect, not assault. The crowd's response echoed back, making the ground vibrate beneath their feet. The atmosphere of resistance intensified as the police in formation began to move towards the demonstrators. Sirens cut through the air, and Julia's heart raced. Stay calm. We're here for peace, she shouted, trying to control the situation. However, the pressure was mounting, and in the background Pedro felt his instinct to protect, which had always guided him in his profession, now conflicting with his beliefs. We need to disperse this group. We need control, the sergeant yelled. Pedro hesitated, remembering what his conscience was telling him. But they have the right to protest, he heard himself argue, but his voice was drowned out by the rising chorus of shouts and sirens. Tension reached its peak when a protester, in a moment of desperation, stepped forward toward the police line, raising his arms in a sign of peaceful protest. We are not enemies. We are here for justice. The phrase echoed, but instead of dialogue, the response was a wave of repression. The police began to advance and the crowd stirred. Back up, Julia cried, her voice breaking amidst the chaos. Fear began to spread, but her determination did not waver. We will not back down. This is for my mother, this is for all of us. In the chaos, Miguel, who was capturing every moment with his camera, realized that the situation was about to turn violent. He positioned his camera to document the brutality that was unfolding. This isn't what we want, Pedro, he shouted, knowing the officer was there in a moral dilemma. Look at them. They're not armed. They just want to be heard. Pedro, torn, saw the determination in Julia's eyes and the pain on the faces of the protesters. The image of Dona Isabel flashed in his mind, and he remembered what his wife had told him the night before. Everyone has a story and you need to listen, and tension escalated. And in a moment of desperation, Julia was pushed down by an officer who ignored her, causing her to fall to the ground. Miguel's cry of no echoed in the air, but the scene was about to turn into a confrontation. Cameras recorded everything, and the truth was on the verge of being revealed, but what would be the cost of justice? The atmosphere was charged with tension and hope, as Julia's arrest became a turning point in the fight for justice. Amidst the shouts of protest and chants echoing through the streets, the community united in a display of collective strength. Then Isabel, with tears in her eyes, watched the scene before her, her heart pounding with the pain of her daughter, but also with an indomitable desire to expose the injustice. The crowd, made up of neighbors, friends, and strangers, was determined to fight for a better future. "We can't give up now," shouted a young man, raising a sign that read, "Justice for Dona Isabel." The echo of the words resonated among the protesters, and new faces joined the cause, drawn by the determination that filled the air. Isabel, though fragile in her age, felt a wave of courage. She stepped up to the microphone, determined to speak. "My people, my family," Isabel began, her voice trembling but strong. "We are here today not just for me, but for each of us who has been treated with disrespect, who has felt the weight of injustice. We cannot let this violence silence us. We need to shout louder. We need to show the world that we deserve respect and equality." The protesters applauded and the energy of the crowd intensified. Miguel, amidst the crowd, watched the scene with a mix of admiration and concern. He knew that the presence of the media would be crucial in amplifying the message, but he also recognized that tensions could escalate quickly. He approached a reporter he knew well. "You need to film this," Miguel said, gesturing towards the crowd. "This is the right moment to show the truth. People need to see the strength and unity of this community." "I'm with you, Miguel," the reporter replied, positioning her camera towards Isabel. "Let's capture every word." Isabel continued, now more calm. "It's not just about me or about Julia. It's about all of us who have been marginalized. It's about every voice that has been silenced. Today, we are one voice, and this voice will not be silenced." Meanwhile, a group of police officers positioned themselves around the police station. The tension between the protesters and the police was rising, and Miguel knew that the situation could turn chaotic at any moment. He looked at the reporter and said, "We need to ensure that the truth is documented. If something happens, the community needs to know." The reporter nodded, while Miguel moved to capture the reactions of other protesters. He saw a father holding his young daughter on his shoulders, the girl holding a sign that said, "Peace and Justice." Miguel felt a pang in his heart seeing her innocence contrasted with the brutality his people faced. "Are you scared, Daddy?" the girl asked, looking at her father. "No, my love, we are here to fight for what is right. The strength of our love and our unity is greater than fear," he replied with a smile that tried to mask his concern. The crowd began to chant, "Justice, justice." The sound echoed, and Isabel, upon hearing it, felt the power of collectivity. She looked at Miguel and saw he was recording everything, capturing a moment that could change the course of history. "Come on, my people. The world needs to hear our voices," Isabel shouted, and the crowd responded with renewed fervor. The looks on some police officers showed hesitation, and Isabel realized that their fight was making an impact. She felt stronger, more alive than ever. Miguel, observing Isabel's transformation, felt a wave of hope. He knew that the impact of that demonstration could be profound, that the voices present would unite to fight against oppression. The moment was crucial, and the need for justice had never been so palpable. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. The crowd remained firm in their struggle. Isabel, with her voice resonating amidst the chaos, became a symbol of resistance, and, in its essence, the community was finally coming together, united in the quest for dignity and equality. The sun began to set, coloring the sky orange and purple as the community gathered in front of the police station. The atmosphere was charged with expectation and anxiety. An unedited video of the incident involving Dona Isabel had leaked, revealing police brutality in its purest form. The clamor of the population echoed through the streets, a mix of voices demanding justice and equality. Isabel's and Julia's words echoed in everyone's minds. Together we are stronger. Dona Isabel, with a firm and determined expression, climbed onto the makeshift platform. Her heart raced, but the courage that had accompanied her throughout her life propelled her forward. Today we do not fight just for me, but for everyone who has suffered at the hands of injustice, she declared, her voice echoing among the crowd. Hearing her mother, Julia felt a warmth in her chest, knowing that her family's struggle had become a collective fight. This is not just our battle, but that of everyone who has been treated as less. The strength lies in our unity, Isabel continued, as the shouts of support grew louder. And let it be clear, we will not be silenced. The truth is now visible to all, and we can no longer ignore it. Meanwhile, Miguel, in the midst of the crowd, felt an overwhelming emotion. He knew that his work had reached a new level, and that the responsibility now rested on his shoulders. With the camera in hand, he was determined to capture every moment, every emotion. When the crowd began to sing, he approached a group of young people holding signs that read, "Justice for Isabel and peace and equality." "This is incredible. You all are the voice that needs to be heard," Miguel said, recording the expressions of hope and determination. "Today the media cannot ignore this story, and we won't stop until real change happens," one of the young people replied, their eyes shining with enthusiasm. "The fight is ours." As the mobilization gained momentum, pressure mounted on Pedro. In a corner of the police station, he wrestled with his conscience and the fear of the repercussions of his decision. The phone rang, and upon answering, it was a colleague from the force questioning him about the recent events. "Pedro, you need to understand that this could end your career. Do you really want to be the whistleblower?" Pedro took a deep breath, his hands trembling slightly. "If everything I do here isn't for the truth, what am I doing? I can't live with this burden anymore," he replied, his voice choked. He knew that the choice he made could change the course of his life and the lives of many others. The pressure increased exponentially as the crowd, filled with strength and resistance, marched toward the police station. Miguel, aware that this was the decisive moment, positioned himself at the front, capturing every instant. "This is what change looks like, and we cannot be intimidated," he shouted. Just then, the video that had gone viral began to be discussed on social media, and the truth started to spread like wildfire. The images of Isabel being assaulted became a symbol of the struggle for justice. Miguel knew that there was immense power in the words and images he was capturing. Meanwhile, the atmosphere at the police station became unbearable. Pedro, overwhelmed by a wave of regret and a need for redemption, decided it was time to take action. He approached his superior and with a firm voice said, "I can't stay silent any longer. What happened was a mistake, and I'm willing to testify. The truth needs to be revealed." Pedro's words resonated amid the chaos, and the community, which had tirelessly mobilized, began to see their efforts finally bearing fruit. Recognition of the pain and injustices began to manifest in a larger movement. Dona Isabel and Julia, upon hearing about Pedro's decision to speak the truth, felt a mix of emotions. "If he's willing to do what's right, maybe there is still hope," Julia said, looking at her mother. Isabel nodded, a hopeful smile appearing on her lips. "Change is a process, and perhaps this way we can find a path to healing." That night, the community celebrated not just a victory, but the strength of resistance and the fight for equality. Miguel, alongside Isabel and Julia, felt that he was not just a journalist but part of something much bigger. Together they were voices of a new era, an era where truth and justice could finally prevail. We have reached the end of this moving story. If you enjoyed it and want to see more accounts like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell. Right now, there's a playlist of videos on your screen. If you want to continue watching these touching stories, just click on it, and you'll be able to watch right away. And now, tell us in the comments which city you're watching from, and leave your like to support our work. Now, a sincere question: Do you agree with what happened in the story? We'd love to hear your opinion. Until the next video.